When a Sigma finally stops reacting, the world around him does something strange. It starts telling the truth. People who once hid behind charm, excuses, or emotional pressure suddenly reveal their real intentions without him saying a word. His silence becomes a mirror, his calm becomes a test, and the moment he no longer feeds the situation with energy, attention, or emotion, everyone else shows who they really are. What they accuse, what they assume, what they push, what they demand, all of it exposes their agenda more clearly than any argument ever could. A Sigma doesn't need to confront anyone. He just stops responding, and the masks fall off. This shift is not weakness, it's strategic clarity. When a Sigma withdraws his reactions, he gains pure psychological visibility. The loud people get louder, the controlling people get frustrated, the dishonest people slip, the insecure people panic, and the ones who were real stay steady. His stillness reveals dynamics he could never see while he was emotionally involved. It is in this quiet phase that he discovers who respects him, who uses him, who misunderstands him, and who only values him when he reacts. Silence turns into insight, and insight turns into power. Before you go, I want to hear from you. Have you ever gone silent and suddenly seen people expose who they really are? If you reach this point, comment "unmasked" so I know you're one of the ones who watches till the end. And if you want more deep psychological storytelling like this, subscribe to UltraWise. New videos are coming. People who depended on his reactions suddenly reveal their real intentions when he goes silent. When a Sigma male goes silent, the people around him don't just notice the absence of his reaction, they unravel under it. The ones who relied on his emotional engagement, his validation, his explanations, or even his irritation suddenly find themselves exposed. Without his responses to guide their behavior, their real intentions rise to the surface. Those who were using him for attention become desperate. Those who wanted control grow frustrated. Those who depended on his emotional presence start revealing just how empty their own contributions were. His silence becomes a spotlight, illuminating truths that stayed hidden as long as he continued to react. And the moment he stops feeding the dynamic exposes the people within it. This exposure happens not because the Sigma confronts them, but because his withdrawal takes away the mask they used. When he no longer reacts, manipulators lose their leverage. They can't trigger what he refuses to display. They can't guilt someone who no longer feels responsible for their emotions. They can't provoke a man who refuses to be pulled into their script. His silence forces them to operate without the emotional cues they once relied on. And without those cues, their behavior becomes unfiltered. Their patterns become obvious. Their motives become loud. The person they truly are, impatient, insecure, entitled, or insincere, rises to the surface because they no longer have his reactions to hide behind. What's most striking is how quickly this shift happens. At first, people assume he is just quiet. They wait for him to respond, to comfort, to argue, to explain. But nothing comes. And the longer the silence stays, the more their true nature emerges. The patient ones remain steady. The genuine ones show concern. But the ones who were only invested in what he provided, rather than in who he was, begin to break character. They overreact, overreach, or expose frustrations they kept hidden. His silence doesn't just stop manipulation, it reveals it. It doesn't just block emotional chaos, it exposes who created it. By the time the truth fully emerges, the Sigma doesn't need to confront anyone. He has already learned everything he needed to know by simply not responding. His silence becomes a test that no one realizes they're taking, and almost everyone reveals themselves through how they react to it. Once a Sigma stops reacting, he no longer needs to question intentions. people expose their true selves in the vacuum he leaves behind. Silence exposes manipulators, because they can't guide someone who gives them nothing to work with. A manipulator's greatest weapon is your reaction. They study your tone, your emotions, your insecurities, your desires. Every flicker of expression becomes material they can shape, twist, or weaponize. But when a Sigma male goes silent, that entire playbook collapses. His lack of response becomes a wall they cannot climb. No matter how they push, provoke, or pull, they get nothing back. And without emotional feedback, their strategies unravel. Their manipulation relies on control, and control relies on reaction. When he offers none, the manipulator stands there exposed, stripped of the illusions that once gave them power. Silence becomes the mirror that forces them to confront their own emptiness. What's fascinating is how quickly their behavior shifts. At first, they pretend to be patient. They mask their irritation, trying different angles. Guilt, charm, anger, subtle pressure, anything to trigger a response. But the Sigma stillness absorbs it all without bending. He doesn't argue. He doesn't explain. He doesn't justify. He simply refuses to play the game, and the manipulator begins to panic internally, because without the emotional cues they depend on, they lose the ability to predict or influence his next move. For the first time, they realize they're the one being observed. They're the one being decoded, and the silence they once mistook for weakness now feels like a psychological spotlight shining directly on their intentions. As the silence stretches, the manipulator's mask begins to crack. Their frustration grows sharper. Their tactics become more obvious, more desperate, more transparent. They raise their voice, soften their voice, pretend they don't care, pretend they care too much. All of it reveals the truth they were trying to hide. Because manipulation only works when someone reacts emotionally. When a Sigma offers none, the manipulator must step out from behind the shadows and show who they really are. And often, that person is far less composed, far less noble, and far more insecure than they pretend to be. By the time the Sigma decides to walk away, the manipulator has already exposed themselves completely. Not because he confronted them, but because his silence removed their tools. They can't twist words he never said. They can't exploit emotions he never showed. They can't lead a man who refuses to follow their script. In the end, silence is not just his shield. It is the truth serum that forces manipulators to reveal exactly what they are. Those with hidden motives become frustrated, slipping and showing their true character. When a Sigma male stops reacting, the people who carried hidden motives begin to unravel faster than anyone else. Their intentions were never built on honesty. They were built on control, convenience, and the subtle belief that they could guide his emotions like a lever. But when he suddenly gives them nothing, when his responses disappear and his energy becomes neutral, their carefully constructed facade collapses. They can no longer read him. They can no longer influence him. They can no longer predict his emotional state. And without that ability, their disguised intentions start slipping into the open. Frustration becomes visible in their tone. Urgency leaks into their words, and the calm mask they wore begins to crack at the edges. What exposes them is not his confrontation, it's his calm. Hidden motives thrive in emotional clutter. They need noise, confusion, and reaction to hide behind. But a Sigma's silence acts like a clearing of the battlefield, leaving nothing for them to hide inside. Without the distraction of conflict or emotional back and forth, their actions are suddenly too clear, too sharp, too revealing. You see the impatience in their eyes, the entitlement in their assumptions, the irritation in their voice when they realize he is no longer responding exactly the way they expected. The person they pretended to be begins to fade, replaced by the person they truly are. As their frustration grows, their behavior becomes inconsistent. They jump from kindness to coldness, from interest to disinterest, from charm to irritation, all within moments. They search for the emotional access points they once used, but find them sealed. Their attempts to provoke a reaction backfire because instead of pulling him in, they expose the selfishness beneath their intentions. The Sigma watches quietly, not judging, not attacking, simply observing as their true character reveals itself piece by piece. And the more they try to regain their grip, the more obvious it becomes that their motives were never rooted in care, but in control. By the time this unraveling is complete, the Sigma has all the clarity he needs. The masks they once wore have fallen away without him lifting a finger. Silence has done what words never could. It has revealed the truth. Those with hidden motives cannot survive emotional stillness, because stillness forces authenticity. And when the Sigma sees their true character, there is no going back. Their exposure becomes his closure, and his silence becomes the boundary they can no longer cross. His non-reaction forces others to face their own behavior instead of blaming him. When a Sigma male stops reacting, something remarkable happens. The people around him are forced to confront themselves. His non-reaction becomes a mirror, one that reflects their tone, their choices, their patterns, and their contradictions with piercing clarity. Without his emotional responses to absorb blame or carry the weight of the conflict, they can no longer deflect responsibility onto him. They can't say he's overreacting because he isn't reacting at all. They can't say he's twisting words because he's not engaging. They can't say he's provoking a situation because he's choosing complete calm. His silence eliminates the excuses others rely on, leaving them alone with the truth of their own behavior. At first, this self-confrontation is uncomfortable. People try to provoke him, hoping to pull him back into the familiar pattern where they can shift responsibility away from themselves. They say things designed to trigger him, to make him defend, to make him explain. But when he doesn't respond, doesn't argue, doesn't validate their perspective with emotional energy, the dynamic changes entirely. His calm becomes a spotlight. The arguments others try to build collapse under their own weight because there is nothing pushing back. Their accusations echo into silence. Their complaints sit unanswered. Their emotional swings go unmatched, and in that unmatched silence, the reality of their own actions becomes too obvious to ignore. As his non-reaction continues, the emotional fog they once operated in begins to clear. The manipulator sees how manipulative they sound. The blame shifter hears how empty their excuses are. The person who relied on drama realizes how one-sided the conflict always was. Without his participation, the script falls apart, and the true authors of the dysfunction emerge. Some people become quiet themselves, finally recognizing their own pattern. Others grow frustrated, realizing they cannot hide behind his reactions anymore. The silence exposes what their words tried to conceal. Sigma does not use non-reaction as punishment. He uses it as clarity. By stepping out of emotional entanglement, he forces the environment to reveal its truth. He gives others the space to finally see the consequences of their behavior, the impact of their words, and the reality of the dynamic they created. And while some will take responsibility, many will simply crumble under the weight of self-awareness they once avoided. But the Sigma is already past the point of fixing. His non-reaction isn't a tactic, it's acceptance. And once the truth is visible, he doesn't need closure or confrontation. The truth is spoken for him. The insecure begin to panic, proving their dependence on his emotional feedback. When a Sigma male goes silent, the first group to react are always the insecure ones. The people who relied on his emotional responses to validate themselves, soothe their doubts, or stabilize their inner chaos. His calm doesn't just unsettle them, it terrifies them. Because his emotional feedback was the mirror they used to feel seen, important, or in control. But when that mirror suddenly stops reflecting them, they are forced to face the emptiness they've been avoiding. Their panic is immediate and revealing. They begin questioning everything. Did I do something wrong? Why isn't he responding? Is he leaving? Their thoughts spiral because they were never grounded in their own stability. They were grounded in his. The insecurity becomes visible in every action they take. They send longer messages. They repeat themselves. They become overly nice or suddenly irritated, switching tones as they try anything to pull a reaction out of him. Their emotions rise and fall unpredictably, because without his emotional presence, they lose their sense of control. His silence exposes the dependency they never admitted. And there it is. They weren't connected to him emotionally. They were dependent on the reassurance he provided without even realizing it. And now, with nothing coming back, they struggle to hold themselves together. This panic doesn't come from love or care. It comes from fear. Fear of losing the emotional anchor he represented. Fear of facing themselves without his attention softening their insecurities. Fear of realizing that their confidence was never real. It was borrowed from the stability he provided. When he stops reacting, they suddenly recognize the imbalance in the relationship. They weren't giving, they were taking. They weren't strong, they were leaning. And the moment he stops supporting their emotional weight, they collapse under the realization of their own fragility. As the insecurity deepens, their behavior becomes more revealing. They dig for responses, they over-apologize, they become dramatic or suspicious. They create scenarios where they can force engagement, but the Sigma doesn't move. He doesn't feed the panic. And in that stillness, the truth becomes undeniable. Their sense of value was never rooted in themselves. It was rooted in his reactions. The irony is powerful. They believe his silence is the problem. But in reality, it is the first time they are seeing their dependence clearly. And the Sigma? He already learned what he needed to know. Their panic exposed everything their words never would. The genuine ones stay consistent, showing who truly values him, without needing drama. When a Sigma male stops reacting, the shift reveals something most people never expect. The genuine ones do not panic, pressure, or demand anything from him. They stay steady. Their tone doesn't change. Their respect doesn't fade. Their presence doesn't become louder or quieter depending on what he gives. These are the people who valued him for who he is, not for the emotional currency they could extract from him. While others scramble, intensify, or expose their hidden motives, the genuinely loyal remain grounded. They don't chase his reactions because they were never dependent on them. Their consistency becomes a quiet but powerful signal, a reminder that authentic connections don't require drama to survive. This calm consistency is what separates real relationships from fragile ones. The genuine ones don't interpret his silence as rejection or punishment. They see it as space, and they respect that space. They don't try to force conversations, create emotional pressure, or manipulate him back into engagement. Instead, they offer stability. They may check in once, but not obsessively. They may express care, but not demand it back. Their understanding is subtle, yet profound. They are willing to stand beside him without needing to pull him out of his silence. And this quiet acceptance tells the Sigma everything he needs to know. These people are not threatened by his withdrawal because their connection with him was never built on conditions. As time passes, their steady presence becomes even more revealing. While others fall away, lash out, or expose their insecurities, the genuine ones simply remain themselves. Their words stay honest, their behavior stays stable, their energy stays clean. They don't try to fix him. They don't try to fix the silence. They simply trust that real connection does not require constant emotional performance. Their consistency becomes a source of clarity. These are the people who value him as a person, not as a provider of emotional reactions. This realization is powerful for a Sigma. It reassures him that not everyone is playing a role or hiding an agenda. It shows him that real loyalty exists quietly, with no spotlight and no expectations. And when he sees this consistency, he doesn't forget it. He notes it deeply. Because in a world full of noise, pressure, and hidden motives, the genuine ones are rare, and their stability during his silence becomes the most honest proof of their character. His calm creates psychological transparency. Everyone's patterns become obvious. When a Sigma male stops reacting and settles into complete calm, the entire environment around him becomes easier to read. His stillness acts like a psychological magnifying glass, revealing patterns that were once blurred by emotional noise. People who repeat the same excuses expose their loops. Those who thrive on conflict show their dependency on chaos. Those who seek validation reveal how empty they feel without it. His calm doesn't just quiet the room. It strips away the distractions that once concealed people's true motives. Suddenly, every habit, every shift in tone, every inconsistency becomes clear. This transparency isn't something he forces. It emerges naturally when he stops feeding into dynamics that keep others' behavior hidden. This clarity is not a result of intuition alone. It's the product of emotional detachment. When he steps back, he stops being a character inside their story and becomes the observer of it instead. He watches the rhythm of their reactions, the timing of their apologies, the cycle of their frustrations, and the predictability of their attempts to draw him back in. Without reacting, he can see patterns with startling accuracy. He sees who always needs attention. He sees who only shows warmth when they want something. He sees who becomes irritated when they lose control. And he sees who remains genuine regardless of how he responds. His calm reveals emotional truths that would otherwise remain hidden behind arguments, noise, or emotional manipulation. As days pass in this state of quiet observation, the psychological landscape becomes even more transparent. People reveal themselves through repetition, the same words, the same behaviors, the same emotional triggers. The Sigma doesn't interfere. He lets the patterns expose themselves. A person who apologizes without changing reveals their cycle. A person who becomes resentful when ignored reveals their entitlement. A person who stays steady regardless of his silence reveals their authenticity. His calm becomes the environment in which everyone else's true nature naturally rises to the surface. This level of transparency gives him mastery over the situation without ever needing to confront or argue. His calm is not passive, it is powerful. It allows him to see the truth of every connection without distortion. And once the patterns become obvious, he can decide with absolute clarity who belongs in his life and who does not. His silence diagnoses what words could never uncover. His calm unveils what conflict tried to hide, and in that stillness, the Sigma sees everything. Once he stops reacting, he gains clarity and control while others expose themselves through their responses. When a Sigma male stops reacting, he steps into a level of clarity most people never reach. Emotional noise disappears. Pressure loses its grip. Manipulation falls flat. Suddenly, he sees everything with sharp precision. The motives behind people's behavior, the patterns they repeat, the truths hidden beneath their tone. His silence becomes his lens, and through it, he gains full psychological control. Not control over others, but control over himself, his boundaries, his peace, his decisions. Without the fog of emotional entanglement, he can finally understand who is genuine, who is draining him, and who was only connected to the version of him that reacted. This clarity is not loud, but it is absolute. It is the moment he rises above the dynamic instead of being trapped inside it. As his clarity rises, others begin exposing themselves without realizing it. His lack of reaction becomes a test none of them know they're taking. The insecure ones reveal their dependency. The manipulators reveal their frustration. The entitled reveal their resentment when they can't control him. The inconsistent reveal their true priorities. Meanwhile, the genuine ones remain steady, showing calmness instead of panic, patience instead of pressure, authenticity instead of fear. Every person around him begins to show their true psychological state, not because he asked, but because his silence removed the emotional stage they used to perform on. In his calm, their real intentions have nowhere left to hide. What makes this shift so powerful is that he doesn't force any of it. He isn't playing a game, creating a strategy, or trying to provoke truth. He simply steps out of the emotional interaction, and the environment reveals everything naturally. Without reacting, he cannot be manipulated. Without engaging, he cannot be pulled into conflict. Without explaining, he cannot be blamed. His neutrality becomes a shield that deflects all emotional chaos, leaving everyone else responsible for their own responses. And those responses, raw, unfiltered, unmasked, show him exactly where he stands with each person. By the time this process ends, he holds complete clarity and absolute self-control. He knows who deserves access to his energy and who does not. He knows which relationships are real and which only existed because he once reacted. And he knows, with unwavering conviction, that silence was the door he needed to walk through to see the truth. Once a Sigma reaches this level of clarity, he doesn't return to emotional entanglement. He moves forward with vision, with strength, and with full awareness of who he is and who he will never give his energy to again. In the end, when a Sigma stops reacting, he doesn't lose control, he claims it. His silence becomes the filter that reveals every hidden motive, every unstable pattern, every insecure dependency, and every genuine connection that survives without needing drama. He no longer wastes energy decoding people through conflict. He lets them reveal themselves through their own responses. That is the power of a man who refuses to be emotionally steered by anyone. His calm isn't emptiness, it's mastery. And once he sees the truth with this level of clarity, he never goes back to the version of himself who reacted out of habit. Before you go, let me ask you something real. Have you ever gone quiet and suddenly seen everyone show who they really are? Your answer tells me how deeply you understand this transformation. If you stayed until the end, comment calm power, so I know you're one of the ones who watches to the final line. And for more psychology and Sigma mindset videos in this exact ultra-wise style, make sure to subscribe. The next breakthrough is already on the way.